My name is Maitreya Bandhu. So I was recently in conversation with the poet, novelist, academic and musician Anthony Joseph. We talked about his life. He was born in Trinidad, his father and even his absent father. And especially we focused on this book, Sonnets for Albert, which won the T.S. Eliot Prize last year. It's a wonderful conversation, and the conversation moves between Anthony and I talking about his life and his poetry, and Anthony reading poems from Sonnets for Albert. So I hope you enjoy this conversation from PoetryEast. Very good to meet you, Anthony, finally. We've been in correspondence since May, I think, something like that, talking about how to get you here, all the way from Camberwell. It's been quite a long journey. Deepest, darkest South London. So let's just go straight into a poem. Let's hear. I thought we'd just start. Actually, no, we changed our mind, didn't we? Yeah. Let's start with a poem that you wanted to start with. Hi there, come in, grab a place. Is there any more places? Yeah, some over there. Yeah. So I basically rather cheekily sent Anthony a list of all the poems I wanted to read, and he wasn't. Anyway, so no. I mean, we're getting on fine about it. It's not been a problem. So let's start with the poem that you chose to start with.
Okay. Actually, our list. I mean, the things that I would have read are very similar to what you had. It's fine. But I wanted to start. We decided that I was going to start with something which, for me, is like where this book actually starts. And my dad, I wrote this book after my dad passed in 2018. But this poem dates back to 2005, when I first started thinking about whether or not there was a connection between my father's absence in my life and my own sort of creativity and my own writing, and how that lack of a father figure in my childhood impacted on me emotionally and spiritually. So I started thinking about it because I was in Washington. I was at Howard University I was at a conference on Black British aesthetics. So the whole day was like filled with these $10 words, big words. And then in the evening, a group of us went to one of the PhD students lived nearby, and we went to her house. A group of about 8 of us or whatever, and we hung out all night, didn't sleep, and then the next morning we drove out. And we drove around Washington, and this is where this poem comes in. Breakfast in D.C. That night, after the conference in D.C., we broke free of post-colonial tautology to gather in the small room of the writer in residence. We were young scholars, poets, novelists, a journalist. We drank white wine warm and nodded to neo-soul. I saw them recoil from the British resident when, in the marrow dark of 3 a.m., he rightly said that there was nothing like the sweet kick of crack cocaine. At dawn, we drove out in the doctoral candidate's car. We saw the Doric pillars of the Lincoln Memorial glowing in the unclear distance, then the white gasp of the monument. We ordered pancakes with blueberries at Pete's on 2nd Street and shared our commonalities. And what we shared, besides our blackness, was that in our childhoods, our fathers had all been absent.
It's a great place to start, a better place to start with. I thought. Really good place to start. But I wanted to start as well with the title of the collection, because I want to query, there's 3 words in your title, and I want to query 2 of them.
Okay.
So first of all, sonnets. So this is a book of sonnets, although some of them go over 14 lines. I mean, not that you have to. So say something about sonnets. Why sonnets? What's the sonnet for you, as it were? At one time you describe your father's stomach as growing sonnet, like a sonnet.
Well, the sonnet is a good poem to have an argument in. It lends itself to philosophical interrogation of yourself. I mean, poetry is an art, I think, which returns you to yourself in a lot of ways. So it's a good form if you're interested in interrogating what you really feel about something. It's a good place to interrogate that. And my father, as you'll hear, we had a really interesting relationship. He was absent for most of the time. And when he died, this was an attempt to sort of pull all these fragments that I had of him together and interrogate his memory, and also mourn him and celebrate him. And the sonnet was just the form. It was just the right form. So yeah, and I think one of the things as well, I was. It's going to sound like I'm name dropping. I'm not name dropping. I was in China. I was doing a residency in China, and there was a poet there from Mexico who'd just written a crown of sonnets for her grandfather who had passed. And we talked a lot about that. And I decided then, I mean, this was going all the way, this was probably years before my dad died. No, this was, probably about the year before he died. And we were talking about that. And when he passed, I was like, the sonnet, a crown of sonnets. So I started writing a crown of sonnets, which is something we'll touch on at some point. I started writing a crown of sonnets that were very strict form, but I'll stop there. I'll tell you the rest of the story later.
And the other question was for Albert, because when I remember typing it once and nearly writing to you, I think I nearly said sonnets for my father. So why is it an interesting use? The assumption in my mind is sonnets for my father when I thought about the collection.
Yeah.
But so. And one of the things that I felt reading the collection is that there's this, I don't know what you think about this, but I think there's this sort of closeness and intimacy, but also a distance at the same time.
Absolutely.
And it's almost that's in the title.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's called Sonnets for Albert because I never called my father Dad because I didn't know him as Daddy or Dad, I knew him as Albert. I knew him as my father, whose name was Albert. So, I had my mom as well, because I didn't grow up with them. I had a curious relationship with their names and how do I address them. I couldn't call my mother Mom or Mommy or anything. In the same way I couldn't call my dad, So I avoided calling them anything at all. I just spoke to them because just to get around the difficulty of what do I call you? I didn't grow up with you. I don't have that intimate dad relationship. So that's why it's Albert, because that's what I knew him as. And that, there's that distance there, So it's Sonnets for Albert, It made sense.
Yeah, I was very struck by that because you could imagine one called Sonnets for my father, couldn't you?
But that'd be boring. I think Albert is more specific.
Yeah, that's right. And somehow, well, let's carry on. Let's hear the first poem of the collection, Shame. In fact, let's hear those first two, I think. Why don't we go for both of them?
Yeah, okay, sure. Shame. What do I say? So Shame, briefly, really... the book starts with with me hearing about my dad's death and then getting home for the funeral and hearing all the stories about how he passed and all that. So this is Shame. My father died with his mouth open, gasping for air. I could not see his hands in the photo my brother took. The balls of his fist were at his side, stiff in the bag he had been zipped into. My father was not a large man, and in his time of dying had grown frail. He certainly would have been ashamed for anyone to see him this way, with teeth protruding, the dark and sunken sorrows of his jaw, and his eyes shut hard for the diving in, as if to blink would change the scene. And Shame too is the last time I saw him was probably in August before the year he passed. He died in, I think, November or something. And I saw him in August in Trinidad. I was there for a couple of weeks. And one of the things I noticed about him was that he seemed ashamed that he was ill and that he was dying. There was a sense of shame. That was the prevailing emotion that I felt from him, a sense of shame. Yeah. Shame too. I was recording in St. Anne's and had one day free, so I told my father I'd be back in December, and he said, December? No, I want to see my son, Tony. We in August. Everything is symbolic in literature. The dust at dry noon in Sambuco, the small birds within the emptiness of the cricket field, heat burning water into sound, tall jungle. My father appeared through curtains, thin with eyes which now saw past the limits of ours. The impish swirl of his laughter was gone. In the photographs I took that afternoon, he seemed to be leaning away, leaning as if from life, from love, in shame.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful.
So, I just say that these, obviously these are very personal poems, and people always ask, how can you read these poems? They're so personal. How can you write about your father dying with his mouth? How can you do that? But I think the personal is the universal, and the more you, as a writer, the more you delve down into your own personal experience and bring it out in an honest way, you actually touch more people. It's a curious sort of enigma that the more you're honest and truthful to the pain or whatever it is, very personal details, you affect more people, because everyone has those, everyone knows what grief is. Whereas if you try to say, I'm going to write a poem about grief, it just doesn't work. Yeah. Anyway, I sound like I'm teaching.
So in a minute, I want to get you to read two more together. But before we get on to that, I thought the other thing that is striking from the collection is it's also a photo. It's a photo essay as well, isn't it? You could almost publish it without poems as a photo essay. You use photographs in it. Very artistically sounds trite, but it's a photo essay. I'm very struck by the photo on the cover, and your father looking away, which somehow again goes with the Albert, rather than father, and his presence but his absence, which is so much of the meaning of the poems. So say something about this, the photo essay like. I mean, some of the photos are just wonderful sort of photos.
Sometimes the photos are used to illuminate the poems. Like this one I just read, we probably can't see it, but this was the poem. This was the last day that I saw him. This was the poem that sort of, the photo that comes out of that poem, Shame, or Shame comes out of that photo. So I don't have a lot of my dad. I have a few photographs, I have a few memories, and that's also, I tried to collect as much as I had and put it in one place. So I wanted to do that. And I also wanted to do the photos, give the reader a break from the intensity of this, heavy sort of emotional stuff. All the grief and all the sadness. There are very few happy poems in here. So the photographs give you a bit of a relief, give your eyes a little bit of a relief. You get to see him smiling, you get to see, You
get to see him young as well, don't you? Which is rather touching.
Yeah.
That he's young, and you get to see your parents on their wedding day. And there's like another essay running alongside the poems at times. Yeah,
but there's distance. I mean, there's absence as well, because there's a huge gap. I have a passport photo of him from the early 70s, and then there's nothing, because during that period he wasn't around. And then the next stuff you see is from the early 90s or something. So there's a whole span of absence.
Yeah, of course. So let's have some more. I thought I'd ask you to read Light and then Flack and Hathaway, and say a few things about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Light. it's always good to give people a little bit of context, I think, with these poems. So this is Light, is a poem about my father's visits, one of his visits. I lived with my grandmother, who was my father's mom. So I got to see him maybe once a year when he would come to see his mother. He was living in Tobago, which is the island, about 8 miles from Trinidad, probably about 11 miles actually from Trinidad. So he was working and living there since the early 70s, had a new family, and he would come to Trinidad very occasionally, once a year, Christmas time sometimes, and I would get to see him. And this is one of those days. Light. Light. Fill the air around these houses. May my grandmother continue to water her roses and touch the aloe fronds in her forever time. Light. As you lit the morning, my father arrived unexpectedly in his new Hillman Hunter, and Mammy ran into the yard to embrace him. And until my grandfather put wire around the veranda, I could sit and swing my legs off the banister, or from the garden, spy up the thighs of my father's new girlfriend, as she laughed with ankles crossed as Albert molded his mother's anthuriums. My grandmother fried fish. We ate. She was happy, even as she knew that later that afternoon my father would be gone again into that gone momentum. And Flack and Hathaway is an interesting poem. It almost didn't make it into the book. It was a much longer poem, and it's a moment I've written about quite a lot of times in prose and in poetry. My grandmother really missed my dad because it was her son. It was her youngest son. Mm. And there was one day we were sitting and it was raining, and we lived next to a savanna, a big open field. And she was standing looking out at the rain from her kitchen. And she was saying, if we sing to him, he would hear us, And we were singing You've Got a Friend. You know that song? Yeah. We were singing You've Got a Friend, which is Flack and Hathaway. It's Call My Name and I'll Be There.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's where this poem comes from. But it was a much longer poem, and I edited it down until it's barely anything. And I said to my editor, I said, I think I've lost the essence of the poem. And he says, no, you found the essence of the poem. Mm. Flack and Hathaway. My father would be gone, months into mystery, but he persisted in our longing. We saw him maybe once, maybe twice a year. We sang Flack and Hathaway, that he would come running. And while we waited, the myth of him grew till the anticipation of his return would fill each room. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things the reason why I want to put those together is these. You mentioned earlier this something of a crown of sonnets, is where there's a strict way of doing it, where I think it's the last line of the last poem is the first line of the next sonnet. So each sonnet seeds the next sonnet. And there's a sort of echo in this book. Yeah. One poem seeds another. Sometimes the crown sense jumps over a few poems but comes back. Mm-hmm. I'd be interested to hear how you originally worked on a sort of strict sonnet crown. Yeah,
I worked on a crown of sonnets for months and months and months, and it was fine, but it felt very restrictive, and I wanted to break the rules a bit because I felt that I understood the form enough to take risk. I was a bit arrogant, I guess. I thought, I'm going to try to do my own thing here, and plus my father's voice and his energy. It felt like it couldn't be contained in the form, in the classic English form, which is an imperial form, which is a form that's, born out of, colonialism and blah, blah, blah. And I'm writing as a Caribbean man, so I wanted to sort of break the chains of that iambic pentameter crown thing, So I did, and I made it a little bit more of a Caribbean lilt and a Caribbean rhythm to the language, and the length of the lines and the breadth. But as you read through it, you can see the remnants. It's almost like the scaffolding from the original crown is still there. So you can still see lines reappear. Like the next poem I'm going to read, you can see one of the lines coming up. That's how it happened.
Yeah. So let's hear that next poem, Jogi Road, which is an important poem in the collection, I think. Yeah,
it's important because it's the only memory I have of my mother and father together. I was pretty small, pretty young, small enough to be lifted and carried, and that's the mark of remembering when you're really small. I was a little kid, and they had a really difficult relationship. They fought all the time, apparently. They got together when they were pretty young, and then they had me, broke up, came back together for a few months, had my brother, broke up again, crazy. And then, the rest is history. But this is one memory I have of them. I don't know how old I was. I must have been really, really small, but it's a violent memory. It's a memory of violence, but it's the only thing I have of them in the same space. And it's also a poem about the fallibility of memory and the fact that sometimes you think you remember something in a particular way, but you can go and really dig into research and find out and realize that you had it wrong. And this was, I imagined or I remembered the poem happening in a particular place, and it turned out it happened a few streets along from there. Jogi Road. From life, from love in shame. The red sawmill on Jogi Road with cedar grain in its fibrous air, red. The old train track and the bridge where my mother's rage was bruising the dark. Her fingernails ripped at my father's shirt, his face. This is blood. The way he looks away, then down with open palms as if in resignation. But memory has a curious sting. The red sawmill was not on Jogi Road, but on Silver Mill. And in the savannah there were 5 salmon trees which cried when cut, not 6. My father held me to his shoulder that night. No, I was looking up from the road.
That's great. Let's take the time. How are we getting on? Oh, no, we're fine. So, the thing that strikes me about that poem and about the collection generally, one of its themes is the unreliability of memory, isn't it? That memories are put in one poem and then corrected in another, questioned, turned around, come back to. Do you want to say something about the unreliable? Because it's such a theme, isn't it, in the book? Is that what memory is?
It is a curious memory. As I say, it has a curious thing. Sometimes you tell yourself, you convince yourself of things. Everyone knows. You convince yourself that certain memories occurred in a particular way, but I think over the years we keep reframing things, reframing things. So I think that happened a lot, and I think a lot of times writing things down is a way of fixing it and saying this is it, this is what happened. There's a American writer called James Salter who was a novelist, and he says at one point I realized, I'm paraphrasing, at one point he realized that the only thing that has any possibility of being real were things that were written down. Otherwise, everything was just a dream. So the act of writing down kind of makes memory real, And sometimes you can try to capture, as I've tried to sort of capture that internal debate about what is truth, what is really happening here, So I think that's what it is. I hope that makes sense.
Let's hear Sweet Yard whilst we're on to memory. And then one or two more, and then one. Yeah,
Sweet Yard is my dad and my brother had a really difficult relationship. My brother and my dad had a difficult relationship because my brother lived with my mom while I lived with my grandmother, and my mother wasn't a great fan of my dad.
I got that.
So my brother kind of inherited a lot of contempt and dislike for my dad and feelings of abandonment. And he tried time after time to reach out to him, and it didn't work out. But this was one time that there was a good meeting of the three of us together. One time I'd gone back home for holiday, the Sweet Yard. In Malik, my father swung a frozen manicou by its tail and came grinning into the yard. Its paws were hooks and eyes half closed and cold. When it had been cut and penetrated with green seasoning and Scotch bonnet, he lit a fire between 3 stones and burst cumin and curry in the hot oil of a black iron pot. It was the year after I had moved to England, and my return that carnival surprised some people in the village. They wondered how I could come back so quick. When people escape to the cold, they don't come back not so soon. We ate the rodent's skin and sucked its flesh from small bones. Even my brother was there, filing away his reservations, wasting faith on our Father.
I really like that, filing away his reservations and wasting faith in our Father. I mean, one of the striking things again about the collection, so again you think of it, is it's very your voice in the poems is very quiet.
Oh, wow.
It's very unassertive.
Okay.
It's very undogmatic. I felt that it was sort of your presence in the poems is unobtrusive. You know, that, for instance, you know, reading between those lines, there's plenty you could have complained about, but there's no complaining in it. There's no criticism of your father. There's no standing in relationship to him and judgment.
There is some.
I didn't notice much.
There's a couple.
But I was very struck by that, the lack of complaint, the lack of, you know, as if you were just trying to sort of introduce him to us.
Yeah.
And perhaps to yourself. Yeah.
I love my dad, even though he was a terrible father. He was not a father at all, really. He was like, you know, father in name only. But I loved him because he was just really a charismatic, interesting guy. And whenever we were together, you know, there were good memories. You know, I didn't have any bad memories of being with him. So yeah, he was a nice guy, and well, he wasn't a nice guy, but he was a fun guy to be around. He was the life of the party kind of character. And because I guess I grew up with my grandmother and she loved him, that rubbed off on me, you know. I kind of, so I loved him. So even, there's a couple poems where I question some of the things he did. You know, he was very a terrible father in the sense that my father had about 12 children. I was the first. We're not even sure exactly how much children he had in the end, but I think it's about 12. And didn't take care of any of them. You know, maybe took care of a couple of them for a few months and then moved on. And you know, that kind of dad, very itinerant, moving around, having lots of women, and then settling down later in life, but still feeling that he should be out there, you know, doing stuff. He was kind of like that. But I still loved him, even for all those things. I think that's what that's what the book is about. It's the capacity to love. How do you love someone like that? You know, you find a way. You overcome everything. You know, that's it.
That's definitely what you've done in this collection.
Yeah.
So let's hear some. You know, we've had Going to the Cold. Let's have Summer in New York.
Okay. Yeah, that's a funny poem. Actually. It's probably the only funny poem, but it's dark humor. It's very dark humor. So I got it. My dad lived in New York for a couple of years around the time of 9/11. And this is a poem that's set there at 9/11. If anyone's offended at 9/11, I'm sorry. If you've lost anyone, I'm sorry. It does kind of go there. But what I would say is that it only sounds dark because the Trinidadian Creole has a way of making even tragedy sound funny. The way we speak, the accent is just, you know, boy. 9/11 boy, and people rail as real dread boy. Ooh, that's terrible. You know, we have a way of just. You see what I mean? It's, you know. Yeah. So anyway, somewhere in New York. He wounded not, so may he escape these people's smoke. Something was happening across East River. Dark was the billow and the sky obscured by smoke. When the second plane struck, Albert was still in bed. It wasn't the boom that waked him, but his neighbor Elaine shouting above her television set. Put on CNN, Mr. Albert, New York burning down. And when Albert jumped up and turned on his little screen, he started to pray soon as he witnessed that biblical scene. In Revelation, the desolation of smoke upon smoke upon smoke. He see tall building fall. He see people jump from a tower on fire. But his faith was so strong that he visioned them landing safe. The terror overcome them, so they put their faith in flight. If it was me, I would have jumped too. It have no shame in that. It is. It's a Trinity thing.
So let's hear two more before then Hamblyn's have a cup of tea and then think more to say.
Yeah,
let's
absolutely.
go. I was very struck by the beer back and the change hand, the change hand. And again, let's go from one to the next.
Yeah.
They sort of, again, they've got this sort of echoing going across the poems, for me at least.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and actually I don't need to explain anything about these. They're pretty self-explanatory. The bareback. We slid you on to the bareback of the hearse was waiting. Your widow sat swaying upstairs in the air-conditioned chapel. I too had sat there gazing before at the ridge of your nose, but she would not look at your face. It was the leader of your church who rubbed oil on your lips, who fixed the ring of flowers around your head. He was a tall, tamarind-colored man who apologized for having a cold, but promised to deal with your body in the high spiritual way. You looked like my father, but something had been lost besides life. Maybe your mystery and mask were finally unraveling. Maybe there was never a mask at all. Maybe you were easy, Caribbean man, a man who wore white and 4 silver rings, whose mother had to make room for him in her own grave. The charge hand. A man who wore white and 4 silver rings would be hunted down and peppered with licks if he ran away from a job with the workers' pay. He was a charge hand, a lesser foreman, entrusted to oversee and keep morale. He told dirty jokes. He made the men laugh. On Fridays, he gave them envelopes of colored notes. But one Friday, he disappeared. The men waited in the shade of the office awning, but he never came to pay. Someone heard he'd left Tobago by boat that morning. The men vowed to kill him. They had wives and children. The myth of the car overturning was real, but would not have been reason enough to leave his new family. It would have been hard for a man to leave, even my father.
They're really lovely poems. I mean, I'm really just very struck with the beer back, the man apologising for his cold. Mm. You know, isn't it interesting? It's often in those tiny little details in the midst of something that's somehow terribly poignant, and then putting that next to the high spiritual way or something.
Yeah.
Like, and isn't that like life? You know, that you've got, you've got a particular day where you apologise for a cold, and you still want the high spiritual way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's something that stuck in my head that he actually apologized. He said, "Oh, sorry, I've got a cold." at the same time sort of anointing my father's head with oil and putting flowers. And I'm like, there's more important things to think about here than your cold. But yeah, he was pretty amazing, pretty impressive. I actually shot some film of it, of him doing his stuff. Yeah, which is interesting. Yeah.
Let's start the second half with the poem Rings, and you'll hear again this sort of this echo of a crown thing, where one poem sort of becomes a seed for another poem later on. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, rings. Just a little bit of context. This is my dad's ring. The middle one here. I'm not. Yeah, it looks like I.
How do you do that?
No, it's hard. This big one. The long big one there was my dad's ring. And when I was growing up, I remember my dad wearing this ring. And I remember asking him what the letters were, because there's some lettering there, and I was asking him. I remember asking him, and he was just laughing and saying, "Oh, boy, I can't tell you that, boy. Boy, if I tell you, no, boy, I can't tell you." He made this big fuss about it, like it was mysterious. So the poem talks about that, about the ring, how I got the ring, and what the letters actually were. But it's also, my brother is in this poem, because this was after my dad died and we were all at the house. And I mean, the poem will tell you, we were given a choice of things to take that belonged to my dad. And it's very interesting what my brother chose to take, considering the relationship he had with my father, the difficult, sometimes painful relationship that was completely devastating for him a lot of times. So it's interesting. You'll hear it anyway. Rings. I only have to look at my hands to see my father. The wide silver ring spans the proximal of my left hand's ring finger. I remember this ring as a child, asking my father what the raised letters spelled, but he laughed, and like everything else made of secrets, he would not tell. It was revealed after his funeral, when we were at the house and the jewel bag got bring out from the bedroom for my brother and I to choose which as heirlooms. The bag held things which were either removed from my father's body as he lay dying or kept in a saucer beside his Bible. I chose the silver and soon deciphered that the raised letters were his initials, A.H.J. in Western typeface. The ring fit firm and right. My brother chose a chain. And
do you mean that symbolically my brother chose a chain?
Yeah. Well, he did literally a chain. And then after, actually someone pointed that out to me. I didn't recognize the significance at first, and I did a reading, and someone came to me after and said, it's really interesting your brother chose a chain. It says a lot about his relationship. And then I was like, wow. Sometimes you write stuff and you don't realize what it means until someone else points it out. It's fascinating, What did you want me to go to? No, that's fine.
I was thinking about that. I thought we'd go to what do I know about my father's body? Because again, we're sort of in that world again, aren't we?
Yeah. I was speaking to someone in the break actually, and they were asking me. This lady there was asking me, how do I find reading these poems and stuff? And I was saying it's really difficult sometimes, and because it's very personal, and some of it is quite painful. And what I have to do, I've learned. I mean, when I first started doing readings, I would go into the poems and really inhabit them, and end up crying and stuff. So after a while, I learned how to read them, how to perform the poems rather than live them. Because once you start thinking about them too much, not that I'm not being genuine, I'm being absolutely genuine, but I do have to sort of maintain a little bit of distance from some of the work. This is a notorious poem for that. What do I know of my father's body? Not even a bottle of duty-free rum or a carton of de Maurier. This time I come with both hands swinging, arriving first at the funeral home where you are already waiting in your pillow box, exuding a kind of warmth. You are my father's body, but I know so little of you. I know the soft weight of your hands on my shoulder at the airport. I know your rings. And I felt the muscle of your panic wrist once when we were far out at Maracas and the ocean almost overcame us. I have seen your gut grow into its own sonnet and your head grow gleaming and bold, but today it is your chest I come to know. How rigid it is when I press upon the crisp sheen of your burial shirt, to tread a rose through the eye of your lapel. And I find the pall-bearing weight of your life when we grip the casket's chrome to lift and carry you down to the hearse waiting in the bright yard.
Yes, waiting in the bright yard. It's very striking. I mean, one of the things that, again, I was thinking, I just come back from a retreat on my own. We have these retreats where you go on the retreats on your own. I was away on my own for 2 weeks, and I was remembering there's I don't know, you can actually YouTube it now. There's an interview, you can hardly imagine it, with Parkinson, with W.H. Auden, with this terrible cracking voice that he had, that's not very likeable. And Parkinson says, what's poetry for, and so on. And one of the things he said that's very striking, he said poetry is a way of talking to the dead. And he says that a culture that doesn't do that is in trouble. And so one of his thoughts about poetry is that poetry is a way of talking to the dead. And I wondered somewhere whether, it feels in a way very much Sonnets for Albert. It feels like a way of you talking to the dead and you talking, because not just your father, it's the world of your father, and in a certain sense, the ghosts that created your father. Well, what do you feel about talking to the dead?
I think it's true, but I also think it's a way of talking to the unborn, and poetry. I haven't heard that Auden quote, but I heard a similar thing. Someone else saying that it was a way of us to speak to our ancestors and also people that are going to come in the future. So it's a way of time traveling. I don't know. I don't think I write I don't think everything I write is an attempt to speak to the dead. I write a lot of stuff about people that have passed, but a lot of it is for people that are still alive, people that are still living, people that are going to read the work and engage with the work. It's almost like I write sometimes imagining how the reader is going to read the work. So I'm thinking of someone alive reading the work as well, Cool. Yeah. But profound. I'm surprised to hear Auden say that.
Right, it is a bit
not
surprising.
Like him,
No, it's not quite like him, is it? And also I was really struck by him saying that a culture that doesn't do that is in trouble. That you need to also speak back to the dead, It also reminds me of there's a famous interview with Heaney, and someone says to Heaney, you talk an awful lot about the dead and about death, and Heaney just says, just remind me what else there is to write about.
No, I could see that.
You could almost imagine those quotes in this book.
Yeah.
But let's go on to your poem Tobago Family, because that sort of broadens it and brings out a whole other part of the collection.
Yeah. So as I said, my dad had a lot of kids, and he had a family in Tobago. This is about that Tobago family. My brother Brendan calls from Tobago. He was not able to come for the funeral, not able to catch the boat, he says, when he heard our father was dying. He is a barber. He has the look of us, the same almond Amerindian eyes. He speaks deeply, lovingly. We are brothers. He confirms a rumor that there is a third Tobago brother, the youngest of those we knew. but Brendan has never met him. He lives on the other side of the island. Long, long dreadlocks, and like our father, the grist and very mystery of blood.
And then actually, let's just go straight on to I Driving a Motor Car now, because it's one of the few poems in the collection where you become, as I said, I think there's this sort of unobtrusiveness about your presence in the collection. And in this poem, you sort of step forward a bit more into the light of the poems.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never read this poem, actually, in a reading, so you chose some good ones. Yeah. I Driving Motor Car now. My father is in Mount Lambert with my brother and sister from Tobago, and my grandmother cooks and we eat and play. I have not met them before, but they are not much younger than I am. To impress everyone, I ask my father to let me drive his car, and I'm surprised when he hands me the keys. I walk upon the hunter like a cowboy. I pump the X and feel its danger. But reversing around 11th Street, I pump too fast and lose control. The car ramps a culvert, metal crunches underside. I see my father in the rearview mirror. He smiles, then bends to check the damage. Ash falls from a cornered cigarette. Nothing is said.
And those two lines, he bends to check the damage, to me sort of is also echoes through the collection, the damage. And then, what was that last line again? Read that last line again.
Ash falls from a cornered cigarette.
Yes.
Nothing else is said.
Yes, nothing else is said. How much the book is about nothing being said, about absences.
Yeah.
But let's go for a poem that you chose rather than me.
Okay.
So you were let's go look at El Sirocco.
El Socorro, yeah.
Socorro,
okay.
even. That's
El
right.
Socorro.
Excuse me.
El Socorro. No, that's fine. Which one of them? I think there's about 2 poems called El Socorro. Yeah. But no, it's fine. I'll find it. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Just one sec. Yeah, I think actually, this is the one. So, El Socorro is just a place in Trinidad. So, my father, in the last couple of years of his life, for some reason, he decided he wanted to be a bachelor again, and he was married to this beautiful woman, lovely person. But he decided, you know what, I want to live on my own for a bit. I want to be a bachelor again. And this is a guy in his 70s. So he moved to this place called El Socorro on his own. And then when he got really sick, he had to leave there. And he left a lot of his stuff there. And the poem talks about that. But you kind of get a sense of my father's character from it. El Socorro. In an April of Saturdays, I visit my father in El Socorro. He is clearly ill and living again as a bachelor. His philosophy, that if God gives him 5 more years, he wants those to be happy, has brought him here to a ground floor apartment on Jagroup Lane. Dust in the sun beams through both rooms. The furniture is old. Cardboard boxes of folded clothes. His tattered Bible and pillbox on the kitchen table. I take photos, saddened to see where my father has arrived in his 7th decade. Does my father know he is dying? When I drive him to the pharmacy, I photograph his hands as he flirts with the chemist's wife. What is it about his hands? His forearm is mine, his fingers. The Saturday after he dies, I cannot go when my stepmother asks me to help her clear his apartment. And yeah, there's some photos. This was the day. It's too small, but if you get the book, you see it. There's some like, yeah, I took these photos at that time. He's flirting with this woman, and the woman's husband is the chemist. And my dad is like, yeah, so you know what's happening, you know. It's crazy, man. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And then, well, you know, let's go to Tina, as you were mentioning that, which I think would be really
Tina.
Well.
So yeah.
We're doing fine.
When my mom and dad split up, my mom went on to have lots more children. She had, I have to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. She had 4 more children. After she split from my dad. No, 3. 1, 2, 3. No, 4. Yeah.
I'm the same with numbers.
4. She had 4 more kids beside me and my brother. So she had 6 children. My dad went on to have, like as I said, probably 11 more, something like that. And Martina was my first sister, my mom's first daughter. So there was me, my brother, and then Martina. So Martina wasn't my father's child, but my mom gave all her children the surname Joseph. Maybe she just liked the name, I don't know. So Martina was Martina Joseph, even though Albert wasn't her father. But they grew to have a really great relationship. They really loved each other. When they would see each other, they would really, you know, they really got on. My father was a spiritual Baptist, which is a religion that we have in Trinidad, which is very close to Santeria and Obia and Voodoo, and it comes from that same family. He was part of that, and she was also part of that. So it speaks about that in the poem, in one line. So if you hear that, I'm just trying to help. The other thing I would say is that I had an argument with my editor about the use of the word quite in this poem. In Trinidad, we use the word quite to symbolize distance sometimes. So I would say, I come from quite Camberwell or quite Brixton, you know, all the way, you know. Really interesting use of the word. But the editor was like, no, people will mistake it for quiet. And I was like, no, they won't. They definitely won't. No, not in the context. This is one of just a couple of poems that are a bit more in a Trinidadian Creole, Trinidadian dialect. If you don't get all of it, that's just too bad. Because, you know, when I read Finnegan's Wake, I don't get a glossary. I don't get a glossary. Tina. Hear this one. The big man surveyed the house. He say, okay, all you will have to break down to build back that kitchen. While they're building, them pillars could support the bedroom. You and your daughter could stay in there. The living room need new flooring. T&Tech not connecting electric until you fix that roof. The wiring faulty. Fire. You're talking good money. Materials, cement, labor. But Tina, you can't live like this with termite in ruins. He had left quite Santa Cruz to go to 5 Rivers to see what could be done for Tina and Trish. Tina not Albert daughter, but Baptist no Baptist, and she have his last name. She dies 2 years after he does. Serpent didn't possess her womb, was stomach cancer, and 2 weeks after, the house she suffered to save fell down. They're not happy. There's hardly any happy poems.
Let's carry on with unhappy poems. There's a sort of, in a way, this is like the sort of closing set in my mind. But starting with this POSGH1. Now that's, can't remember what you said that stands for.
Port of Spain General Hospital. Yeah. Port of Spain is the capital of Trinidad, and the hospital is an old colonial hospital. So I'm going with,
There we go, 76.
Yeah.
There we go.
'Cause POSGH1. Having caught his first heart attack, the big man gives me hope to hold. Says he feels good enough to leave. He flirts with the nurses. He is in hospital on Charlotte Street. The hospital that always smells of burnt milk and disinfectant. The same hospital of first consciousness where I visited my grandfather after his blackout and sickness in 1977. After stopping with my grandmother on Gordon Street corner to buy the old bull, peanut punch and Mopsy biscuit. The hospital of windows from where I watched blue smoke rise from the morgue and turned away from my mother's bed to catch my evening flight. 2 days later, she blinked hard into cancerous death. That same ex-colonial hospital by Memorial Park, where my father once lifted me onto his shoulders so I could see the carnival pass.
I was particularly struck by that, so I could see the carnival pass, because it suddenly, sorry, I'm sounding like a bit sort of name-dropping myself, but Frost said, with someone talking to Robert Frost about poetry, and he says, why not have it say everything? Which is a beautiful way of saying, why not have it say everything? And I thought that last line there is a little bit of an example of that. So I could see the carnival pass. Why not have it say everything about the whole of life, not just a part of it? And like you were saying at the start, you find the whole of life by going into a part, but then you end with to watch the carnival pass, like the whole carnival of life, not just the literal carnival. Why not have it say everything?
That's helpful. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, that's interesting.
But let's go on to poetry, because I was really struck by this.
The poem poetry.
The poem, yes, rather.
Oh yeah.
We've been sort of doing poetry, haven't we? So,
yeah. Actually, this is kind of funny, and it and you can hear a sort of echo of the nothing else was said appearing in this as well. It's kind of self-explanatory. Poetry. When I give my father a copy of my book, he looks at the cover and says, "That is you and Dennis? Where is that? Ramki soon trace." He fans the pages with his thumb. I watch until he pauses near the center to draw his head back, to fix his eye to read. Then another few lines before turning to the back and scanning the surface of the sentences there. The bio and the blurb are the things which make him smile. I don't think he ever read the poems. But somebody told him that I had written about his travels in the spirit world, to the Guinea coast, to China, in search of secret colors. And driving from the beach one day, he said, "I hear you're putting all my business on the internet." Then he laughed. Then he laughed, and nothing else was said.
That's lovely. Cage. Then he laughed, and nothing else was said.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, true story.
True story. So this is I think we've got a bit of time for two more. But before we have those two more, I thought I often ask every guest that I get at PoetryEast, because one of the visions of PoetryEast is to open out the form, to sort of show people what the form can do. It's a great form. It's just become very niche. You can. I've been reading Derek Walcott again, and he's a great exemplar of someone who can write a short lyric, he can write a huge book-length epic. It's such a flexible form. It can rhyme, it can not rhyme. It's an incredible form, but as a readership has shrunk enormously. Particularly post people like Eliot, after all that time where the modernists were sort of making it so difficult, and I think it sort of distanced the audience, and it never really got it back. So I thought it'd be good to hear from you. What's poetry for? Why would anyone read poetry?
That's a difficult question. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I don't know. I think I don't pretend to know the answer to that, but I have ideas. I think poetry, more than a lot of art forms, is really the art of being human. I think when you really practice poetry, and it is a practice, as opposed to, prose can be, I mean, we can ask Monique, prose can be very, you learn the structures. It's about learning structures. You learn how this is supposed to work, and you put yourself into it, of course, but you're following particular patterns and stuff. I think a lot of times poetry forces you to look into yourself for the patterns, or to look into yourself for a way of articulating experience. It forces you to be honest, because if you write a poem that's dishonest or whatever, it's a terrible poem. It just doesn't work. You have to be truthful, and you have to be human, I think. So for me it's the art of being human. But in terms of what it's for, I think it's a way of basically, it's like, I mean, I used to look at poetry, as a form of meditation. So I would get up every morning. I don't do it anymore. I should do, but I don't do it anymore. I used to get up every morning and write poetry for about 45 minutes. And that was I used to tell myself I was very spiritual, because I would get up and I would be doing this practice of writing poetry for 45 minutes every morning. And I did that for about 2 years straight, every day. And I got some amazing work out of it. Some terrible stuff too. But it was a way of connecting my body, and because it was a physical thing, So yeah, it comes back to this idea of being human, for me at least.
And does reading it help us be human, do you think?
I think, sadly, because of the way poetry is taught, or has been taught in the past, a lot of people are scared of poetry. A lot of adults are scared of poetry. Maybe not so much younger students of mine. Some of them still have this remnant of, I'm scared of poetry. But generally, you find adults, they're like, I can't read that. I don't, as you were saying, I don't understand it. I can't get to it. It's because of how it was taught, and it was taught in this way that it was distant and aloof and separate from you, and you had to learn it, and it was scholarly, and highbrow. It was taught like that, so people still are scared of it. But I think once you find a way in, maybe by reading people from within your culture, because the Western canon is the Western canon, but we're not all from the West, so there are poets for every culture. If you find a culture that is your culture, you would find a wealth of poetry coming from there, and you find a way into it. And then you realize, oh wow, they're talking about me. They're talking about my experience too. So I think a lot of people think poetry is just Keats and Yeats and stuff, but it's not. A good example is someone like Linton Kwesi Johnson, who people might have heard of. Linton started writing because, in his own words, he wanted to write for people that didn't have a voice. Young black youth in the 70s didn't have a voice, didn't have a literary presence. And he decided he was going to fill that gap and write for them, to give them something to read, And that's another thing. I think it's Alice Walker. Someone asked her, why do you write? And her response was, I write because there's something missing. So I write to fill the gap. I write what I would like to read, But we can go many different directions with that. But yeah, the art of being human.
That's a great way of thinking about it. So let's hear 2 more poems to finish. I thought we'd go. I think they're near the end of the collection. You've got Sons. Again, because there's such this theme in the book of absent fathers, of sons, of families, of love, of distance, of closeness. And then the final poem in the book, the Tumuli at Santa Cruz.
Yeah. Okay, so Sons. My father and I are sitting on his veranda in Santa Cruz. He asked, when last you hear from your brother? But I haven't in years. I am there for carnival. I want to talk about heat, the dry trees, But my father wants to tell me how he met my brother at Correp Junction while waiting for the lights to change. He said that Dennis walked up to the security van and held his arm where it rested on the door, called him Mr. Joseph, and asked, "How are you, sir?" "Your brother Horty," my father says. "He feely bright. And the way he does talk proper English, Tony, he talking more English than you." Parakeets fly from tree to tree. The whip snake rest. My brother and I are sons to my father, nothing else. And we're finishing with
the final poem.
The Tumuli. The final poem. Yeah, the final poem in the book is at my father's funeral. So it begins with me trying to get to Trinidad in time, which I do for the funeral, and then it ends with the funeral itself. So as I said, he was a Baptist, and there was a certain amount of ritual involved in his burial, some of which involved fire, the burning of the hole. So they dug the hole, which was my grandmother's grave.
Wow.
Yeah, they dug it, because after a few years, you could dig in the same hole, apparently. So they were able to dig, and they burnt the hole, and they did all sorts of ceremonies and rituals with bells and flowers and stuff. And the poem talks about that. Does everyone know what tumuli is? Tumulus? Tumuli? Tumuli is, a tumulus is the mound of dirt that grows over a grave. It's that mound. It's called a tumulus. So when you have multiple of that, apparently tumuli. So Santa Cruz is the cemetery, the name of the cemetery, Santa Cruz Cemetery, and the tumuli in Santa Cruz refers to the graves all up on the hillside and in the valleys. Fire for you, and the mothers of the church lit candles upon your breastbone. Fire was lit, even in the hole to purify the earth to receive you. They poured flame from brass goblets of croton and pink ixoras, and swung a chant to kill death. O death, draw out your sword. Your body lay in the sweet brown. The red church on the hill grew nervous in the noon. The long hearse purred in the sloping yard. Perfume sang from the bosoms of aunts and far cousins. Look out over mountains. Look out where rayo trees are planted on tumuli of bones like ladders for spirits to cross into heaven. Oh, fold me in and fly me around the valley. We shall all be rooted in this well of ours eventually. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
That was really great, really good. Thank you very, very much for coming.
You're welcome,
Anthony. And isn't it really worth, isn't it, just exploring just this one collection, because there's so much in it. As you say, you go back, you go into the specific, and you find the whole cavalcade, and the whole culture. So I really wanted to thank you. I do want to encourage you all to join the PoetryEast mailing list. One of the things I'm trying. We sort of after COVID, the sort of audiences went down because so I'm trying to sort of see whether we can build it back up again. We've got this fantastic backlist of people like Wendy Cope, Anthony Gormley, Colm Toybin, Jory Graham, so many others. People like Ian McGilchrist. Later on in this season, we've got at the end of November a friend of Tom Gunn, the English poet who lived mostly in America. Clive Wilner, he's coming to talk about the life and poetry of Tom Gunn. We've got someone talking about the life and poetry of Richard Wilbur, the American poet. We've got Mary Jo Salter, who's one of the editors of the Norton anthology. She's coming from the US next year. So, do join the mailing list. It's by far the best way for us to, talk to people and encourage any friends that who are into poetry or might just you come tonight and think they might really enjoy this. Give them the bookmark. So there's everyone on your chair. You've got a little bookmark that shows you the back list. We've got all the films. We'll be filming tonight, so we'll release edit the conversation and release that next week. But most of the PoetryEast have been filmed, so it's got this lovely back catalogue of all kinds of wonderful conversations. But let's really, really thank Anthony Joseph for coming and sharing us with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.